Hello and welcome back to the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm Brian.
I'm Jay.
Tonight, you guys, we are bringing you round two with Josiah Pleasant and a very special guest, Mr. Dan Lasota. Is it Lasota? Soda?
Lasota, yes.
That's what I thought. I meant to ask you that before we started. Epic fail on my part, but I was close, right? So, Dan is visiting Josiah up there. He currently resides in Nepal, correct?
Yes.
So we'll definitely dive into that. But we wanted to give you guys a little background on Dan, and before we jumped into the whole episode, if you guys haven't heard part one of this with Josiah, please go back and listen. Josiah just kind of, blew us away in the last interview. Jay felt like he had accomplished nothing in life after talking to him the first time, so we're going to do even better at that the second time around.
Which is still the current record. Yes, I'm holding it strong.
So, Dan, where are you originally from, and how'd you get started into fishing, and what's kind of your go-to style of fishing?
So, in terms of that, I'm originally from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
A little city called the Scranton, home of the office. That's my hometown. So, since I was 3 years old, I was fishing with my dad and my grandpa, and fishing has always been a big part of my family. We had relatives that lived on a lake. I spent my summers growing up living on a lake. And then we moved to a lake as well. And after college, I ended up living on a lake on my own. So my whole life, I've lived near the water in some sense. I've been fishing since I was 2 or 3 for the last 30 years. For me, it was always a big thing with my dad. That was the thing we've gone on thousands of fishing trips. So my favorite, you asked me my favorite type of fishing?
Yeah. Are you like mainly a bass fisherman, fly fisherman?
So my favorite species has been trout fishing, specifically steelhead fishing. Spring Creek steelhead fishing is my number one favorite thing to do.
Okay.
Just catching a 15-pound steelhead on 5-pound tests in a creek and chasing it downstream a couple hundred meters is just my favorite times. So, but along with that, I'm not specifically one type of fisherman. I do center pinning, I do spin casting, I do fly fishing. It depends on the species and the situation, and I use any method. So.
You're a generalist.
Yeah, yes.
Nice. Very cool, man. Very cool. So you currently reside in Nepal. What made you decide to move there, and then kind of what do you do for work out there?
So my professional background is construction management mostly, but along with that is business development, architecture, and other aspects of construction as well. So a lot of my background is experience and expertise in housing construction for marginalized people, actually. Okay. So I've worked with many NGOs, many organizations. I've had the opportunity to countries. A lot of those countries, I was supervising or managing or working on projects in those countries. I've had the opportunity to go to 48 states. A lot of that was through projects and volunteering as well. So I love to travel, obviously. And a lot of those projects, what I do is I have expertise in sustainable building technology, alternative methods to building that may not be conventional in the U.S., but in third world countries, in rural areas, specifically dealing with disaster areas has been my background mostly.
Okay. Very cool.
I went over to Nepal in 2015 after the earthquake. 600,000 homes were destroyed. Many lives were lost, unfortunately, during that time. And so I went over in response and I've been working there with an organization based out of Nepal, and we work on projects in coordination and partnership with other INGOs, or the local government, or any other organization.
That earthquake in Nepal, that was the one that kind of wiped out the base camp at Everest, right?
Yeah, it did a lot of damage at base camp during that time. And then also, so Kathmandu, the main city, got hit, but the epicenter was actually outside of the city.
Okay.
So a lot of the damage was in these rural villages, and just the entire village got destroyed in a lot of places. So our work has been in those areas that are only accessible by helicopter.
Sure.
Areas where you can only get materials in by donkey or mule. I've been managing the logistics and managing the procurement and kind of the project process for all of that. So it's been really interesting being able to work in an environment like Nepal.
Well, I know Jay's got a logistics background, so I mean, how do you feel about that? You starting to route donkeys up mountains with 2x4s? I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, we kind of dove into this a little bit when we first talked to Josiah. He's trying to get some kayaks up to him, and obviously, he's only accessible by boat or by plane. So I mean, I could only imagine what it's like in Nepal. I mean,
I don't think there are procedures known to me in my line to get stuff to him. But I'm sure that there's a middleman, some kind of a broker that sees that and arranges all that coming in. So I'm sure there's a point where it stops. But yeah, that sounds. I mean, and what's the trek too? I mean, even from like the nearest point where you get materials from, and then you have to bring them in by mule. Like, how far is that transit?
So it would be 3 days by walking. But when you're bringing in 20-foot pieces of steel, it's not possible to bring that by mule. So one specific building project we worked on was 50 homes up in this remote village. I think it was 5 or 6 helicopter trips to sling load all of the steel material, and then all of the cement bags, and we actually used soil to build the walls using an alternative method. So if we used 1,000 trips of mules, so about 25 mules were available. So each mule made 40 trips roughly. So it took 60 days of 25 mules every day just to get the materials to the site. So 1,000 mule trips just getting local materials up from the river to the sites.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's on those really skinny trails too. They're not even vehicles can't get on there, obviously. So I'm sure that's nice and treacherous at times.
Yeah, Nepal has a reputation for being dangerous. I mean, every year trekkers die, unfortunately, even just on the trails that are made for mules. The trails are that small and along cliffs that there's not enough room for people and mules to take those trails. So there's a lot of accidents that happen every year.
Josiah, have you made it out that way to Nepal yet?
I have, yeah.
What did you think of it? Just in general, obviously the stuff he's doing too, but
yeah, Nepal has an interesting mix of folks coming from developed countries striving to do good. I think the earthquake in 2020, Nepal also has a unique mix of minority people groups, like folks that don't speak the primary languages, and so they're totally separate and apart from the rest of the world. And that's what brought me to Nepal. So I was working with folks that they have little to no written literature in their own language. And obviously that creates a huge barrier from an educational standpoint. That creates a huge barrier, for young ladies that are trying to understand, how should the world be? How should life be? All they know is what someone tells them, kind of thing. And so at the same time, there's all this outdoor adventure, sports, business presence. So it's a weird mix of the uber wealthy trying to go up mountains next to folks that have never read their own name and who have no economic possessions to speak of. And so, I've worked in Africa, I've worked in Latin America, and I would say Nepal's a really unique mix of, you've got folks going to kind of live an abstract dream to most of the world. It's pretty abstract to spend 50 grand plus to climb a mountain to most of the world. And these are people that they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Dan worked very specifically in putting housing together for folks. And so it's a weird deal when you've got abject poverty next to extreme wealth. And Nepal has that. Nepal is also unique from a developing country scenario, because it actually has a cooler climate once you get up high, which for polar bears like me, it's kind of nice. And I'm not a huge fan of sweating all the time. So Dan and I actually jumped on a dirt bike, and we went about 70 kilometers into the Himalayas, surveying a project. And we actually made the first descent on a river. It's called the Sankoshi, on paddleboard. So this rental place had a paddleboard. And I was like, hey, can we rent that? And they looked at me and they're like, you want to rent the paddleboard? Why? Well, has anybody ever gone down this river in a paddleboard? They're like, no.
Yeah, they're like, no, dummy. And he's like, hey, look at this guy over here coming up on his house. He's like, yeah, give it to him. All right. Hey, yeah, we'll give it to you.
So Dan and I stay with this local gentleman who is working with us from a nonprofit standpoint to help a minority people group. And so we're staying at his place, and his son speaks pretty good English. Like, he spoke really good English. His name was Philip. And he always had a smile on his face, and he looks at me, he's like, a leopard ate my goat yesterday. I'm like, okay, Philip, that's fantastic. This place is off grid. This is legit. And he's like, leopard's going to eat my goat again tonight if you don't help me. And I'm like, okay, what do you need? We'll check it out. Sure enough, there's leopard tracks in the dirt around this place. So next morning, Dan and I get up, and we got a kayak and a paddleboard. So we make first descent on this river. And it just strikes me that Nepal is such a different place, because here we are doing some really purposeful work. There's some folks, not in the area that we were, but there are folks going to primarily Everest that are quite wealthy, and there's such need here. What a cool convergence of outdoor adventure and trying to help people. And so that's what I was doing on that trip, is creating economic opportunities. There's a fish called the golden mahseer that's a bucket list fish for a lot of people. And so while making first descent on this river, part of my role was to figure out, is this river legit for golden mahseer fishing? As we're making this first descent, what was it, 20 minutes into the paddle, and it's class 5. I mean, it's
class 5 on a paddleboard.
Wait, really?
Oh yeah, we got our butts handed to us. It was pretty fun.
You got wet?
A little bit.
Oh man, you would have to like stand up and just surf at that point, I think.
Oh, it is. It's literally, you're in surfing stance.
Oh my.
Rapids. But we go, about 15 minutes in, and I'm keeping my eye out for fish as we're going, because the plan is to come back and fish spots that we identify are pretty solid. And we knew that no one had kayak fished it ever. So from a kayak fishing standpoint, we're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. 20 minutes into it, these locals have car batteries in backpacks with wires connected to the car battery onto a metal pole, putting it into the water as we're floating by the water, and the fish are just coming to the surface electrocuted.
Oh, my God.
I think the fishing's off the table. I think we're fishing golden mahseer in this river. It's a fun paddle as long as you don't get electrocuted. But so, we make it down, and it was a fun paddle. I mean, we hit some crazy rapids. It was a little bit more fun in the kayak than the paddleboard at times, but it was fun. But that float to me sums up Nepal. That you can engage in some outdoor adventure activities that are mind-blowing, just an absolute blast. There's a lot that can be done to bring economic development to people by developing those activities, which Everest is a great example of that. Sherpas are, I would say, more than any other country I've been to, recognized and honored and compensated fairly. Nepal gets that in terms of being a country where poverty is so great that people would, rather than fish sustainably, electrocute the water and kill every living organism that still goes on. And so it's a contradiction, right? Like, hey, come to our country for commerce. And by the way, we're electrocuting the water.
I never would have thought that was even an option.
That's
yeah.
crazy.
You know, I mean, I would have thought of netting first.
Yeah.
Sure. And there were nets all over. There were tangled, gnarled nets everywhere. We were ducking nets and going over nets. But this, you know, our developing countries from the kinds of things that you on this show showcase and that all four of us care about deeply, those resources are either gone or they're gone. The only places that you can go to find a sweet fishing adventure are heavily patrolled by heavily armed national forest guards. Those are the only places where you're going to find fish. If it's an area that's not heavily patrolled, you know, it's good luck to try to find fish. And we went remote. I mean, if we would have kept going on the road that we were on, we'd be in Tibet. We're pretty remote, you know. Clutched on a dirt bike, holding a flat rod for 75K in traffic to get to this place. And
so we were just an hour and a half from the Chinese border, actually. So.
Oh wow! So I mean, is that the reason for the armed guards?
No, this spot had no armed guards. That's why they're electrocuting the water without repercussion.
No. I mean, I'm just talking to what you were saying, that like the only good water that's left is patrolled by heavily armed. You know, I mean, so why heavily armed? Is that protecting the resources, or is that because of the Chinese border?
Oh no, resources. Absolutely protecting resources. And
that's in a different location. So that is down south in a very famous national park, which has a very large golden mahseer population, which is a very, very popular trophy fish for a lot of fishermen. And that's where they go. But unfortunately, I haven't had the chance, but that is a tourism, fishing tourism spot. So that means it's expensive, and there's a lot of rules against that. But it's a great location if you want to catch that fish. So.
But they do protect that resource there. So there is an example in Nepal of a resource being protected, but the amount of money that goes into it is significant. Do they protect the fish as their primary resource? No. Their primary resource they're protecting are tigers, elephants, and rhinos. But if you're already protecting tigers, elephants, and rhinos around the fishing holes, it kind of protects the fish too.
Sure.
And they do have a lot of regulations in place concerning the mahseer, such as catch and release only, and all those typical standard rules for that.
Yeah.
But I would say, from a fishing standpoint in Nepal, there's still a lot that needs to be done. There's no fishery program or anything like that. The rivers and the mountain streams, there's a lot of opportunity. In terms of trout, I think so much can be done. I know India over in Kashmir, they've started to do a few programs a couple years ago, and they have a great rainbow trout program now up in Kashmir. So it's definitely the waters, the condition of the water and the geography definitely supports trout being there. It just hasn't. There's just, in my opinion, just not enough programs in place yet, and I don't know if there's going to be.
So is there native trout in the streams in Nepal? Is that what you're saying?
Josiah can help me out. I think it's snow trout.
Yeah, but snow trout is not salmonid, so they call it snow trout because probably some European was like, that's a snow trout.
Okay,
it's not a salmonid, but yeah.
So I think it might actually be part of the of some type.
Europeans are great for showing up to a place they're not from and saying, "I'm going to call this thing that." You know,
right.
My name's Stellar.
So they do have what they call it snow trout, and even the golden mahseer is also technically part of the same family. The golden mahseer is not a trout or anything like that. I don't think there's any native trouts in Nepal that I know of.
Okay.
I know that northern India and Bhutan actually have decent trout populations, but that was because they were introduced decades ago and they just reproduced. That hasn't happened in Nepal yet that I am aware of. So.
Gotcha. So one thing I wrote down here as we were talking, and you were talking about the language barrier and things like that. What is the actual native language of Nepal, or is it a mixture of some?
Well, I'll speak a little bit about these questions. My wife is actually Nepali too. I don't know if I mentioned that. So the main language is Nepali.
Okay. I didn't know if it was Nepali or Nepalian or what the proper term was for it.
There's many districts throughout Nepal, such as the Gurung district or the Tamang district, and so they all have their native language.
Okay.
And those are actually all people groups too. So that's and a lot of people from those tribes do speak those language, and a lot of people living in those villages don't speak Nepali. They only speak their native language.
Okay.
But if you live in Kathmandu, you speak Nepali. That's Kathmandu is the capital city, for those that don't know.
So you're pretty fluent in Nepali?
No. I am not.
Because no.
I've had to learn good English.
My wife speaks pretty good English, so I don't have to worry about that. But I know conversational level. I'm not that in depth as I should be.
How do you?
We went to where we were paddling. They didn't speak Nepali. They spoke Tamil. And so literally, for us as American adventurous dudes, it was a very short distance, but literally that's like going 40 miles in the U.S. and the next town over does not speak your language at all.
That's
you
crazy.
think the Quebecois are intense in Quebec. This is a whole, sorry, we literally don't speak your language. Hope you can learn ours.
And even though the national language is Nepali, I mean, if my wife went into those villages, they won't understand each other. So it's that much different that the neighboring districts don't even understand each other's language at some times.
That's crazy. How do you say "have a nice day" in Nepali? I'm putting you on the spot.
Don't put me on the spot.
He's like this.
There's different ways to say it. There's not.
I say namaste.
Way. You could say namaste, which essentially is kind of a respectful way of saying "have a nice day."
Okay.
That's also when you greet someone, namaste, and then when you leave someone, namaste. But you can also say "see you later," "see you tomorrow." Pachi Patola is "see you later."
Okay. Very
Got
cool.
it.
Namaste is nice because it's like be peaceful. Have a really peaceful path. It's nice. Like
So
I like having a go-to word like that. We should have a word like namaste.
Yeah, totally.
And just one more interesting fact I wanted to say was that, so back to the districts, I mentioned the Gurungs and the Tamangs and those many more. So those are all different people groups of where they're living. So the people group that lives next to where Everest is, so the most concentrated Himalayas are near Everest, and that section is called Solukhumbu. That's where some of the tallest mountains in the world are. So that people group that lives next to that is the Sherpa people group. So a Sherpa is not someone who climbs. It happens to be a people group that lives in a high altitude and happens to be very good at climbing. But this is a fact that a lot of people don't necessarily know that. So a Sherpa that's the last name. That's a people group. That's a tribe. But Sherpas happen to be the best climbers in the world as well. So
absolutely.
The Sherpa dudes, when you go hiking with them, it's unbelievable. So this guy, it's the Rudy Rudiger thing, 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing.
Yeah.
The dude hauls 400 pounds on his back up a freaking cliff and doesn't swim. I mean, some of these guys it's unbelievable. And part of it is meditation. So I was born in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, one of the highest towns in the lower 48. And so I've got in my blood the ability to deal with altitude, right? So that's 7,500 feet. These guys are born at like
14, 16, 18,000.
Their ability to acclimatize, I mean, literally their blood's different. The way their muscles function with oxygen is different. So they're super.
A lot of the villages and tribes are between 10 and 15,000 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of an Everest geek. I'll let the cat out of the bag. I've watched like numerous like documentaries and things like that on Everest, and that's one thing that's always fascinated me is those Sherpa people or the Sherpa folks. Because they, like you said, they're born at a high altitude, and it's funny when you see interviews of some of these like world renowned athletes, the Sherpas are kicking their butts climbing the mountains, and these guys are struggling, but yet they're supposed to be some of the most well framed mountaineers of the sport. You know what I mean? So it's kind of crazy, man.
So the image to capture for everybody listening is you've trained your whole life to climb this mountain, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You eat the best food, the most expensive food. You've got a 50-pound pack that you've meticulously organized everything in. These dudes have a burlap sack full of rocks, smoking a cigarette, and they're roasting you up the mountain. It's unbelievable. It's hilarious. They're just smoking a pack as they're going up 20,000 feet.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, one of the things when I was digging around and looking into some of Dan's background, I mean, I saw quite a few pictures of you, hiking through some pretty high-looking mountains and stuff like that. So, I mean, is mountaineering one of like your other hobbies, so to speak?
So I grew up an avid outdoorsman and was always into extreme sports. So, I mean, I enjoy hunting and fishing and ice climbing and rock climbing and mountaineering and whitewater kayaking and kind of anything else outdoors. I've done a lot of it. Some tons of mountaineering. Yeah, I've got to do a little bit in Nepal. So I've gotten to do 2 kind of small expeditions in the last 4 years. And
just did one, yeah?
Yeah, the most recent one, I was able to go to just under 19,000 feet, which is a very small Himalayan mountain.
Small.
Dude, I would be puking. I already know it because I have trouble in Colorado sometimes.
Our biggest mountain in all of North America is not that much taller than one of his baby mountains in the Himalayas. Like Denali is our legit mountain. Yeah. And for those guys, they're like, oh, that's cool. You climbed Denali. All right.
Dude, and it takes a long time to acclimate too. I mean, for my snowboarding years, I've been to Steamboat too. And I mean, that's like, 13, 14,000 feet, some of those peaks. And it takes a minute when you come from Illinois at 260 feet, I think. And then you go all the way up to, dude, I was sick the whole time. I mean, it hit me so hard. I couldn't drink enough water. I drank no beer. And I think, what was it, the time we went to Steamboat, no joke, we were there for 4 days, the whole trip. I'm pretty sure, and I got this documented, I think like I puked 13 times. Dude, all I ate was crackers and iced tea. That's all I could stomach the whole time. Man, it was rough. So I know, like, just being able to climb that high, I can't even. I probably couldn't do it. It would take a long time to acclimate. Plus, I'm pretty sure we're at different levels in our fitness, so I'm sure that's not working in my favor either.
So Denali is also known as Mount McKinley. That's the highest mountain in North America at 20,000 feet. 20,327 feet. So,
dude, you're like,
yeah, I could only imagine.
That's rough, dude. You gotta take it slow at that altitude too, especially when you're a newbie.
So when you're doing 18,000 feet, do you have to stop to let your body acclimate to get oxygen back into your blood, kind of like they do when climbing Everest and things like that?
Yeah, so it depends on the individual. It can be you need to acclimate at, I'd say the average might be 4,000 meters. It may be 5,000 meters. 5,000 is roughly a little less than 18,000 feet. So some people it's 3,500 meters. So it kind of depends. So I lived in Nepal the last 4 years. in Kathmandu, I would say it's similar to Denver, and that's 6,000 feet.
Okay.
Base elevation, 7,000. I'm not sure exactly, but I actually was fine. We did acclimate one day, but base camp was at about 16,000 feet, and then we went up to 19,000 on summit day, and then so it wasn't too bad for me. I was climbing with a good Nepali friend of mine, and the two of us just went up by ourselves, and we didn't have any issues. So everything was pretty good. So,
man,
once you get above 6,000 meters, it's a little more technical, a little more detailed. You need to take more days. That's when it gets more intense above 6,000 meters. So I was at about 5,600 meters.
Ask them what they did when it got really cold at night. How did they overcome the cold?
So you guys
this sounds like a loaded question.
I was teasing with him before, but so what I was showing with him was actually there's a very, very iconic mountain in Nepal, very similar to the.
You sidestepped the question already.
I'm getting to it. So the Matterhorn in Switzerland is one of the most famous mountains in the world. There's a mountain in Nepal called Machu Picchu, and it's this very iconic pyramid-shaped top mountain. So we were actually summiting the mountain right next to that.
Okay.
That mountain is actually forbidden. You can't climb it. The government doesn't allow anyone to climb it, and it's never been summited. It is considered a holy mountain. So we were climbing the mountain directly next to that mountain, and at night, our base camp was at the base of this mountain, which has 80-degree to 90-degree slopes, and there was 5 or 6 avalanches throughout the night. And we're sleeping at the base just a couple hundred meters away from this mountain. So all throughout the night, we can hear these giant avalanches happening above us. So
That's crazy.
And it stayed warm.
Yeah. I'm so cold. Yep.
So I told Dan, man, my solution for that's easy. I got 2 Labrador retrievers. I never have to sleep with another dude. My dogs keep me warm. I'm good. Crazy.
It's one of those things, man. You gotta do it to stay warm if you want to survive. That's crazy, dude. Well,
that's nuts, man. What an exotic place. I mean,
yeah. I mean, go ahead. Go ahead.
So it's gonna be a little bit of a story. So there actually is a story that happened with that. So just to give you a rough idea, in the first 2 days, so we started an elevation of 4,000 feet, and we went up to just under 19,000 feet in 4 days. But the first 2 days, so we went up 13,000 feet in 2 days. And just to give a little bit of perspective, this is a mountain that is not traveled often. A lot of people don't climb this. We were the only group in the last 3 months that tried to summit. And by the way, I did this in monsoon season, which wasn't the best idea, but due to timing and logistics, that's the week we had to do it. So it rained every single day. We're right in the middle of monsoon season. And so with rain and melting snow, there's a lot of issues with that as well. And there's a little bit of danger that could happen with crevasses and all that as well, which we did run into crevasses at the top of the mountain. But my background, I have a little bit of background in that, so we were able to climb safely to the top. But so there's no water resource. A lot of trekking routes, a lot of popular mountains, they have places where you can refill on water, and they have whether it be a spring or something set up, and it usually tells you on a map. So this mountain didn't have any water resources, so you have to carry your water with you. So needless to say, I was carrying 30 kgs backpack. So I had a 67-pound backpack that I carried up 13,000 feet in 2 days.
Wow.
So
I'm sweating.
But he had to snuggle with the dude to stay warm. So
Yeah. Josiah's going to get it out of you.
That didn't happen. But So just to so
What happens in Nepal stays in Nepal.
it was because I was carrying 11 kg of water, because you have to carry enough water for 2 or 3 days. There might not be a water source for 3 days, and we actually did go 2 complete days without seeing a water source. And that was because we were climbing on a ridge. There was no rivers, so I mean, once we left the trail, we didn't see any hikers or anybody for the next 7 days. So it was just us. So the interesting thing, we got lost. Like I said, it's not a very popular mountain, so there's not a lot of trails. So it was a little bit in the wilderness. In the middle of the forest, in the middle of not seeing a human for 4 days, we ran into this little old man in the middle of the woods, and he actually helped us get on the right track. So that was just a Sherpa shepherd that was taking care of some Himalayan sheep at 13,000 elevation. He had his what do you call it, group? He had his herd of 500 sheep, and he was out there with 2 other people. So we ran into these Sherpa shepherds in the middle of Nepali wilderness, and we were lost, and they kind of saved us. So we ended up crashing with these shepherds and hanging out with them in a tent and helping them take care of those sheep. And so yeah, it was a fun experience. And we actually took the day to acclimate at the tent. So we ended up hanging out with these shepherds, and it was just a wild experience. So
That is crazy, man.
Yeah.
Now we know how guys stay warm at night.
I notice your ending of your story is kind of short.
Oh man.
That's I mean, well, and you know what? The story sounds great, and like, there's one thing ringing in my head from what you guys were saying before. Mainly about how poverty-stricken the area is, and especially after everything. Then you've got these rich people coming in, doing the ascent of Mount Everest and everything. Is there like a designated portion that goes to the local people when you come in to do that? I mean, is there any kind of program set up, like, built into that? I mean, because it sounded like you alluded to it a little bit, but I'm wondering, is there anything more to, because I mean, I could see what you're saying of being weird, seeing, these uber rich people come in, and, there's, people that are, that live in the area that just don't have basically anything except the basic means to live, so I mean, that
it's a lot better than it used to be. There's a lot of programs set up. A lot has been done. Like you pointed out before with the earthquake, and at the Khumbu Icefall is a very famous area of Nepal. It's the first section out of base camp when you're climbing Everest. There was an avalanche a couple years ago, and several Sherpas lost their lives. So it's instances like that that a lot of programs have been built up to support the families of these Sherpas, because that was their income. So there's been a lot of programs and people that have come in to help with that situation specifically, and that's bringing attention to other areas of marginalized people throughout Nepal as well. But there has been a lot done to help the Sherpas in terms of wages and salary, and also to help the families if anything were to happen as well.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I would think that they would set something like that. I mean, if you got that kind of money coming in, I'm sure somebody's going to figure out how to sublet some of that and push that towards the locals.
Yeah, and those I can't think of any of the names right now, but those world-renowned mountaineers that come to Everest almost every year that have helped set up training programs in Khumbu, such as the Khumbu Climbing Center and places like that. That really provide a great educational benefit for a lot of the families or the locals, and it just helps out the Sherpas and helps out the locals a lot in different areas.
Yeah, from some of the stuff I've seen, going back to the I know what you're talking about, that avalanche that hit the Khumbu Icefall. I know there was kind of like a trying to think of the right word, almost like a fund set up for the families of the Sherpas that lost their lives. But I think that from the last time I saw, and I could be wrong, like I think a portion of the guide fees for everybody that climbs Everest goes to the local village, just because that is their main source of income. I could be 100% wrong. I don't know. Going off of documentaries, don't believe everything you see on TV and the internet. So,
well, I'm sure they're smart to it. I mean, they've developed some kind of commerce, some kind of a plan to be like, hey, we got these rich people coming up here all the time. We should get some of that money. It only makes sense.
There's definitely programs in place and partnerships in place like that. Yeah. I don't know any specifically or the names of those, but I do know they're definitely in place, and a lot more have popped up over the last recent years. So it's great that there has been a lot more attention to that.
Heck yeah.
The trouble with a lot of that stuff is government efficiency, because there's funds coming in from the guys paying that, what amounts to them to a surcharge. But does that money end up in the hands of the folks most? And unfortunately, the answer is oftentimes it doesn't. But that's the intention. So, is it better to have something that's broken but trying to do good versus nothing? Sure, but boy, there's room for growth for sure.
Very cool. So we'll get off the mountaineering subject. I know that's kind of off topic from what we normally talk about, but I think it's very, very interesting conversation, and it's not very often you get to talk to somebody that lives in Nepal, right? So definitely wanted to touch on all that good stuff. So let's jump into the fly fishing collaborative. Both of you have seen what this has done. Josiah is a little bit more involved than Dan, but Dan has seen it firsthand on what this program has done and things like that. So, since 2013, there's been these aquaponics farms built in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Thailand, Rwanda, Belize, Kenya, Mexico, and Nepal. So, I mean, that's kind of spread worldwide. So, why don't we jump into what these aquaponics farms are and how do they work necessarily? What's the whole thought process behind this?
Yeah, so Bucky Buckstabber is the executive director of Fly Fishing Collaborative. For a couple of years, I've had the opportunity to serve to offer guided kayak fishing trips for folks that believe in the mission of Fly Fishing Collaborative, and those guided fishing trips are auctioned off at a yearly gala. So that gala will be March 6th, 2020. You'll be able to hear a bunch more about our project here in Juneau at that gala. But that's been my collaboration up until the past 6 months, when I've become what amounts to kind of a national or country or site host for a fly fishing collaborative project. So my involvement the past 6 months, I've needed to become a student of what Bucky's built in terms of mobilizing the fly fishing community, utilizing the intention of many of us to do good with our fishing, right? Just fishing just to fish it can be pretty nice, but what if we can take our fishing and do good with it? That's kind of the gist. So Bucky and I connected over that. That's been a part of my life, independent from Fly Fishing Collaborative. But how sweet is it to plug in with an organization that has track record and proof of concept, helping the marginalized, but doing so through something that you're passionate about. And for some of us, we're okay at fishing, so it's kind of neat to use that for good. That's the gist. In terms of the farms themselves, the way I view it is there are situations and times and places where it is not feasible to farm by conventional means. So the farm that Fly Fishing Collaborative built in downtown Kathmandu, Nepal, there's no soil hardly anywhere. There's a zoo next to where they built the the aquaponics farm, and that's about the only place that has soil. And even the animals at the zoo don't seem very happy about it. So there's no soil in Kathmandu. It's a concrete jungle, right? So if you live in that downtown area, which millions of people do, it's a huge city, where are you going to grow your food? Well, generally most people aren't. So you're at the mercy of those food commodity prices. And Kathmandu, surprisingly, is a fairly expensive place to try to make a living. So what that aquaponics farm does is it's a soilless farm, and you can grow a lot of food in a concentrated area. So the project that Dan and I got to see and connect over in Kathmandu, it's built on top of what amounts to an adventure B&B. This B&B, they receive folks, and generally they're folks that are on adventure of some sort. And so the idea of being able to grow food in a place where you can't grow food by conventional means is huge. But even beyond that, it's the ability to grow food that's really healthy, avoiding pesticides and herbicides, and just really giving you good stuff. If you're familiar with the term food desert, an aquaponics farm is a tool to try to deal with food deserts. So, that's what that looks like in Kathmandu. In terms of other projects, essentially it's been an awesome way to help folks that are struggling in poverty to have a sustainable food source that we know is healthy and good for them. Specifically, my involvement here on the project in Juneau, obviously it's cold here in the wintertime, and it's dark here in the wintertime. You're not going to be growing any food in the ground. Conventional means there is no agriculture here. So aquaponics, an upland aquaponics farm gives you the opportunity to grow food year round in a place where it's very difficult to get good, healthy, fresh food. So, it's a tool that can overcome challenges in supply and demand. It's a tool that can really lift people out of poverty without having to get a super advanced degree or without a huge amount of capital. It does cost money to put an aquaponics farm together, but if you're to compare, different ways to try to help people out, it's a fairly efficient way to do so. So convergence of people who love fishing, doing good, and a source of providing income for folks that's sustainable and effective.
So I think in my research on this, I think I saw that Bucky had said it takes roughly about $15,000 to build one of those farms, which I thought was pretty incredible, seeing the amount of food. I forget the statistic that he threw out there, but it was like thousands of pounds of food that is generated in just a year's time, or just a few months, or something along those lines. But the one thing that I thought was fascinating was there's essentially no waste produced from these things, correct?
Yeah. So fish are the nutrient source for the plants. So you pick your fish. It could be trout if it's a cold water system. If it's a warmer water system, you might use striped bass. If it's a real warm system, you'd use tilapia. So it depends on where you're at as to what kind of fish you use in the closed system. But it's the refuse from the fish that fertilize the plants, and it's the plants that clean the refuse from the fish out of the fish's water. So you've got this closed loop where the bad stuff from the fish is good stuff for the plants, and vice versa. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
And how much energy does it take to run one of these things? I think from what I saw is a lot of them they set up running off solar power, correct?
Well, yeah, it depends on your climate and your context. So here in Juneau, we'd have to have grow lights in the wintertime to give light to the plants to grow. So that's a utility expenditure. For your water circulation, the fish have to have oxygen to do well. The system is predicated on, good oxygen. Guys that like to fish for trout or salmon, just think about where the fishiest spots are where you catch fish. It tends to be where the water is really oxygenated. So that costs money to keep that water circulating. In a cold place like Juneau, you also need to keep the system warm, right? Obviously, it can't freeze, and your optimum plant growth kind of starts off at 68 degrees. Well, if it's 10 degrees outside, keeping your structure at 68 degrees, there's some expense there.
Sure.
But when you're shipping food in from Seattle and all that food was shipped to Seattle from some other place, even if you have that utility expenditure of keeping it warm and, having grow lights, that kind of thing, it still is more efficient and better than some conventional means of putting good, healthy food on the table. So there is some cost involved.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we touched on last podcast we did with you was like, the cost of living in Alaska is super high just because of having your food shipped in and, fuel, things like that. So, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, you're going to have some costs running the actual farm itself, but you're still technically saving a ton of money because you're not paying for those shipping costs, basically. That's pretty cool. So how many people would you say are fed from just one farm, currently? I mean, so you guys have one set up in Juneau there?
No, so we're on the front end. So
Okay.
Fly Fishing Collaborative has been working with me over the past several months to fundraise for this project. So in launch mode, so we have some land secured. We have some housing secured for the folks that will be benefiting from the aquaponics farm. And really a lot of what we're doing is laying the groundwork. Daniel and I got to present this morning on the housing side of what we're doing. And Daniel is a contractor, engineer, architect, is bringing a specific skill set to that. So yeah, we're in the launch phase. We filmed our fly fishing film tour, the video that will come out, the film that'll come out. It's been 2 months now. So that'll come out and we'll make the rounds with that. So creating awareness, developing, but we want to move as quickly as possible because there's people in need. We'd like to serve sooner rather than later, but there's cost to do so.
For sure. Sure.
Is there something active right now for people to donate to? Do you have like a GoFundMe or something of that sort?
Yeah, so 501c3 organization. So folks can go on the website. They can say, I want to donate to a project. They could either donate to a project in general, and that'll go into a general fund, or they could specifically say, I want to donate towards the Fly Fishing Collaborative build in Juneau, Alaska. So that's all set up, and we've been blessed that, some folks have already jumped in, but we'd love to get more folks to circle around this. And what better community than the fishing community to say, hey, come be a part of this thing. And by the way, if you want to get involved and you're stoked to be involved, I might invite you to come up and come fishing with me. So, yeah.
I'm rubbing my chin. So, I mean, that kind of draws in.
I'll be the narrative, like, guard.
That kind of.
Sorry, we were talking over each other.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, that kind of draws into the next question is, how are these farms funded? And you touched on it. Like, you were doing some guided kayak fishing trips, and those were auctioned off, so to speak. And that's, in doing some of my research, I saw that, Bucky and one of the videos that you guys had put together, was talking about that you guys have guides from pretty much all over the place donating guided trips, and the proceeds from those trips or the trips themselves are donated, and then the funds created from people purchasing those trips are going to help build these farms, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the ways to support the farms. Absolutely.
And then the donations on top of it, obviously. So, I mean, what are the plans looking into the future? I mean, you mentioned that they're trying to build one in Juneau. Any other areas out there that they're trying to build some of these and help out? Or
Yeah, Bucky gets dozens of requests every year to facilitate the creation of an aquaponics farm. And so I'm really blessed as a local partner to work with Fly Fishing Collaborative in this way, because it's a competitive process. They had a kind of a roundtable a couple months ago when they needed to sit down and figure out the reality that they can't do all the good projects that people ask them to do, right? Because there's only so much time and resources. And so, yeah, there's several more projects on tap. I'll kind of leave that for the Fly Fishing Collaborative in-house team to kind of showcase when those projects are up and coming. But yeah, there's several more in the pipeline. So basically, as much as the fishing community gets together, to make good things happen. That's really the only limitation that they have. They've got a good system in place. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this too. Like, so as far as this being done in other countries, are you growing indigenous foods to the areas, or is it just the kind of the generic, like, corn, other vegetables, maybe rice? I mean, I don't know. I guess you can grow anything hydroponically, right?
Sure. Yeah. Man, the more local you can get, the better, right? The more you can contextualize what you're doing, the better. So from my end, there's some awesome foods here that are really recognized as native or indigenous local foods, and a lot of them are superfoods. But a lot of us folks that did not grow up in Southeast Alaskan native culture, we're not aware of those foods. The first time that I had nagoon berries was a few months ago, and they're a superfood, and they're delicious. They're awesome. How cool would that be if I could grow nagoon berries in the winter when no one else is growing them, and honor local culture? And by the way, it's a superfood, and it's probably a pretty good margin on growing nagoon berries because people like them. They're tasty. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the more you can do that, the better. From a nutrient standpoint, a big part of what we're doing here in Juneau is serving especially kids that don't have access to healthy food. And sometimes these are kids that would go in between or without meals. During the school year, there's kids get subsidized or free lunches. Those same kids can go hungry in the summertime because they're out of school, right? And there's not a school lunch program in the summertime. So one of the things that we've done is we've partnered to provide healthy lunches for those same kids in the summertime so that they don't go without meals. The cool thing for us is, it's not a Twinkie and a snack pack.
Yeah.
We can grow superfoods and even honor local culture and put something together that's good for them.
Well, yeah, so on that too, since you're growing hydroponics or through hydroponics, is your yield doubled every season? Like what's your yield output versus, having to deal with the elements in normal circumstances? Obviously in Juneau, that's, probably more cold at the time than it is warm. But, as compared to other locations, does it allow you to just put out more food versus having to deal with the seasons?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, growing season in Alaska is short, very, very short. So
one thing I saw that Bucky talked about on the Nepal farm was, I think it was 100 heads of lettuce every month was created from this little farm. I mean, 100 heads of lettuce, that's a lot of freaking lettuce,
like constant.
Yeah,
right?
constant.
Over
Yeah,
and over and over.
Every month, 100 heads of lettuce.
That's pretty cool.
That's quite a bit of food just in itself, So I was kind of blown away by that statistic. I couldn't even imagine 100 heads of lettuce, That's like the mound that you see at the grocery stores here in the Chicagoland area. I mean, that's got to be close to 60 heads of lettuce. So you're talking almost double that a month you're generating from. And I mean, it's kind of cool, the way these farms are set up. So one thing I will say is if, you're listening to this and, you get back in front of a computer, you get pulled over on the side of the road, in a parking lot, just Google Fly Fishing Collaborative, and they threw together some pretty stellar videos that are hosted on Vimeo, and I mean, you can see the layout of these farms, and it's pretty killer how it's set up. I mean, it's, when you think farm, you're thinking farmland, things like that. It's almost like these benches, and then they have like a tank of water underneath. The water's circulating. There's fish tanks, like Josiah had touched on earlier, where the fish are kind of feeding off some of these nutrients, right? But then they're also fertilizing back into the water, correct? Is that how that works? I mean,
yes.
In a layman's terms, so to speak.
I mean, you're introducing the food for the fish, right? So whether that's pelletized feed or you can do an insect feed, and then, the fish process that feed, and it's their waste that feeds the plants. Gotcha. So you are introducing food for the fish.
Yeah. Gotcha. So it's pretty crazy. I mean, that garden in Nepal, I mean, it wasn't very huge. I mean, if you had to say space-wise, what, 50 by 100, if that, or 30 by 50?
Yeah, I mean, it fits on a section of a rooftop on the B&B.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
I think it's 40 by 30. I could be wrong,
Okay.
but it's about that size.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
just to speak to the efficiency of aquaponics, I don't deal much with that specific project that was in Nepal. I visited it, and I'm good friends with the people that oversee it. But I also I have other friends that are also experts in aquaponics, and one happens to be in Nepal as well, working on another project. And just to speak to the efficiency, you can grow a head of lettuce in about 15 to 18 days from start to finish.
yeah, crazy.
Wow, man.
And
I know it.
some of the popular things that he grows specifically would be lettuce, strawberries, and other plants and vegetables similar to that. So
That's
I
crazy.
need to get me an aquaponic strawberry field going in my backyard or something.
here you go, buddy.
You know, I had, what was that?
We need flagship builds, man. We can make it happen. You can get the Paddle and Fin podcast. In our Paddle and Fin strawberries. We can do it.
You know, and I think I read something on like Popular Science one time about cities starting to adopt this in the U.S. Like down the road, you know, having basically like not skyscraper but tall type, you know, hydroponic growing stations for like the cities so they can give them food and everything. So, I mean, I would bet that this program is probably one of those. Like, I bet there's governments watching this closely to see how this turns out, because it could be like, you know, the testing, you know, of it for worldwide, you know, as things move forward.
Yeah, you kind of cut out there a little bit, but I think basically what you were saying is this could be a possibility to solve the starvation issue in the world.
Yeah.
In layman's term.
Well, yeah, and I think it's adoptable throughout the whole world, just in general. You know,
Yeah,
as,
right. Oh, yeah.
like us, you know, but I think this is like probably like, you know, I would suspect that big governments are like watching this and going, you know, like especially in big cities, they're going, you know, this is working here, so we know this will work, and you know, not to veer away from the collective, but
Yeah. No. I hear you, man. Well, I think it's a good talking point though, because what they're doing can be looked at worldwide as a solution. You know what I mean? So kudos to the Fly Fishing Collaborative for what they're doing. And, you know, I know they're not the only ones out there doing it, but they're one of the groups in our quote-unquote fishing community that have stepped up and taken it to the next level and helping out across the world, you know. And that was the thing, too. You know, when I first brought this up, I listed all those different countries where you guys have already set up farms. I mean, that alone is unbelievable. I mean, what was it, like 13 of them, 10 or 13 of them have already been set up. And like Josiah said, I mean, there's more in the works, you know, so it's, you know, it's not something that's necessarily going away. So that's only going to expand. So, yeah, again, my mind's blown by both of you guys. So
I cleaned the garage today.
Hey, Jay.
Life, happy life. Sometimes cleaning the garage.
Pat yourself on the back, Jay.
Oh, and I cut some hedges. I mean, I'm on a roll.
That's pretty productive.
I'm trying to catch up to these guys. I don't know how close I am, but it's more like one of these things. You're like, you know, set that. Oh, it's a tree. I can't see him.
No, it's very cool, man. It's very cool. So, yeah, I don't have anything else. You got anything else for these guys, my man?
No, hey, I commend you both, man. It's really it's pretty cool how much you guys are involved with and what you're doing. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's like you guys are, you know, you know, you have a crossover, but yet you guys are both doing your own thing separately, and it's amazing, man. I mean, I can't even fathom, juggling that much. I mean, it's. I'm glad you guys are doing this. This is really cool, and I mean, this is a very interesting conversation. Probably one of the best that I think we've had on the podcast. Not to knock anybody else, but I mean, you guys are so unique in what you're doing. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So here's the one question we did forget to ask, and I think this is probably one of the most important ones. How did you two meet?
So we actually met in Nepal.
Okay.
So I told you before that.
Was that my tent?
What was it?
Was that the tent? Is that why the story?
I only
cover up. Hey man,
very clear in no uncertain terms.
Is Nepal, bro.
Well, it's funny you said that. So my snuggle buddy from the the mountain expedition, he was actually the one overseeing the project that the Fly Fishing Collaborative did in Nepal. So he's the good friend of mine, and he met Josiah through that, and so just a mutual connection, and through that Josiah and I met, and I actually was helping him consult on some sustainable building options that he was looking into. So we did some site visits, and we had a little bit of adventure in Nepal as well, and then we just kept in touch.
When he says site visit, we took a kayak and a fishing rod, and we had a blast.
And a paddleboard down class fives. I'm just saying, I think like that, I mean, we're Jackson guys here. I mean, EJ goes down class fives like it's his job, but like I want to see EJ tackle a class 5 on a paddleboard. So I think that's a challenge.
I don't think he's done that.
I don't think he has either. I've never seen it. So Josiah's like, stepping up the game. So I want to see it. The race between EJ and Josiah down class 5s on paddleboards.
Here it is, EJ. Make the superficial again and go down a class 5.
Josiah's like, great, you're calling me out to the owner of Jackson Kayaks.
Oh, EJ will do it. Come on.
Yeah. But, so that's super interesting, man. I mean, like Jay stated, you guys are both, doing some stuff together, but initially you guys were doing your own kind of community service projects, so to speak, and that's kind of how you guys met, was a crossover in Nepal, of all places. I mean, you guys both grew up in the United States, and then you meet thousands of miles away in another country and form a friendship and a whole nother collaborative, right? To just, better the lives of others. So, I mean, I don't know. With that being said, thank you to both of you for being such great human beings, for sure. So
it's a fun adventure. I'm blessed, man.
It's
man. Fun. It's a neat community too. And seriously, I mean, it's the fishing community is at the core of a lot of this stuff for me. And it's really natural in that, you got a hard day of work and you're dealing with the issues that you personally and we collectively as people face. It can be overwhelming. It can be frustrating. And I think it's no accident that we're guys that relax and decompress with a fly rod or a paddle in hand, right?
Yeah.
And there's a neat thread there that we can really take something that on a surface level is not viewed as a tool for good, and it's a huge component of that. I mean, literally, Dan's in country for a little bit, and he's taking some time to decompress. He and his wife are expecting; they've got a baby on the way.
Oh, congrats, dude!
Yeah. Part of his trip was, man, I got to go decompress. Let me call Josiah and see if we can get on some fish. So yesterday, Dan procured some seafood. It was awesome, man. Got out on the boat. It was a good day. But there's a natural component of doing those kinds of things to be healthy in the work that we're doing. So yeah, there's something to it for sure. I'm still learning, but
absolutely.
Man, it's fun.
Absolutely, man. Well, congratulations on the baby, Dan. Boy or girl, don't know yet?
Don't know yet.
Well,
we'll see.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Well, gentlemen, I think that pretty much comes to conclusion. Do you guys want to shout out any of your projects that you're working on where people can go donate, help out, anything to help your guys' causes? You want to drop some website names and stuff, and I'll also drop them in the show notes of the episode as well.
Yeah, sweet. So flyfishingcollaborative.org, that's the dignified income side of what I'm doing up here. So that's creating aquaponics farms from a multi-level use standpoint, right? So to serve kids that might otherwise go without meals, to provide jobs for folks that might not otherwise find employment, and to do so in a therapeutic and uplifting way. So that's flyfishingcollaborative.org. Agathosinternational.org, and you can just straight up Google Agathos Village. That's the housing side of what we're doing, providing affordable housing for folks that might not otherwise find affordable housing. And that housing includes on-site programs and services and opportunities for dignified income. That's what Daniel's up here helping me with. You know, he's bringing his architectural engineering expertise. He's built homes around the world. So he's looking over my shoulder, making sure, you know, our plans for tiny homes and neat structures that are sustainable here make good sense and are earthquake, weather, and cold proof. So we're stoked. But yeah, if you've ever been in a situation where you've known someone who struggled to find a home and a place of permanence, of stability, of security, it's a really big deal. So it's a great cause to get involved in. You know, on the org side, I'll say this too. We've looked at experiential therapy as something that's huge. So taking people on adventures, and I'm stoked, to give a shout out to Jackson Adventures, and that, you know, our rebrand, or I would say evolution and growth is a kayaking company, is really tapping into the purpose of adventures, right? The way that we connect as a community, the way that we are able to be the best versions of ourselves, getting out and stretching ourselves. That's pretty cool, the convergence for me of these nonprofit endeavors, but literally here on the Paddle and Fin podcast, the company that we represent from a kayaking standpoint is going that direction, saying, hey, get out and have an adventure that impacts your family, impacts your friends for good. We're all better for it. So it's a cool full circle kind of deal for me. So Jackson Adventures, it's live. We can talk about it.
Yeah. Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah. Yeah, we've been biting the tongue on that one for a hot minute.
A little bit.
How about you, Dan? Do you got anybody, organizations, anything that you work with you want to shout out from like back in Nepal, anything like that, man?
I mean, not currently off the top of my head. So I'm in a little bit of a situation in terms of my job that Josiah is in. So the projects that I would be working with that would be just or anything like that, all the ones that Josiah just mentioned, actually. So I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be what I'm currently working with. So
okay, yeah, I just didn't know if you had any other things, man. We didn't want you to feel left out, buddy.
So thoughtful.
Well, we appreciate you both, man, taking the time out and again sharing the stories, sharing the info, and fighting the good fight. So that being said, guys, till next time, tight lines, smooth paddling.